Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Kieran Thorne and I am 28 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 14 months. This happened during the fall of 2024, when the missing person case of Ezra Caldwell turned into something that still haunts me. I was still new to the job, only 14 months in, when the call came through on that gray October afternoon. The voice on the radio was Supervisor Martinez, her tone carrying that particular weight that meant someone wasn't coming home for dinner. "Thorne, we've got a missing hiker, Ezra Caldwell, 19 years old, college student from Seattle. Last seen yesterday morning heading out on the Hoh River Trail. His campsite reservation was for 2 nights. Checkout was this morning. Site's still occupied, but no sign of him." I grabbed my notepad, pen already moving. "Any witnesses to his departure yesterday?" "Negative. Neighboring campers say they heard him moving around early, maybe 600 hours, but nobody saw him leave. His car's still in the lot, tent's still up, food's still hanging in the bear cache." The metallic taste of adrenaline touched my tongue. In my 14 months, I'd handled 3 missing person cases. 2 were hikers who'd taken wrong turns and found their way back before we even started searching. The 3rd was a day hiker who'd suffered a heart attack on the trail. We found him within 4 hours, alive but hospitalized for a week. This felt different already. "I'm en route to his campsite," I said, shouldering my pack. The October air bit through my uniform jacket as I stepped outside the ranger station. At 4:30 p.m., dusk was already creeping between the towering Douglas firs and western hemlocks that made Olympic's rainforest feel like a cathedral built by something far older than human hands. Ezra's campsite sat in Loop B of the Hoh River campground, tucked between 2 massive Sitka spruces, whose roots created natural windbreaks. His blue 2-person tent looked almost toy-like against the enormity of the surrounding forest. The bear cache hung properly, rope-tight, food sealed. His Honda Civic sat in the parking area. Washington plates, a University of Washington parking sticker on the rear window. Everything looked normal. That's what bothered me. I circled the campsite slowly, noting details the way my training had drilled into me. Sleeping bag laid out, but not slept in. The nylon still held crisp factory creases. Camp stove unused, still in its original packaging. Water bottles full. The boy had prepared for an overnight trip but hadn't actually spent the night. The trail register at the Hoh River trailhead showed Ezra's signature from yesterday. E. Caldwell, day hike to Hall of Mosses, back by evening. His handwriting was neat, precise, the writing of someone who'd been a good student. But the Hall of Mosses was only a mile loop. Easy walking, well-marked trail. You couldn't get lost there if you tried. I keyed my radio. "Martinez, this is Thorne. Subject's signature shows intended destination as Hall of Mosses. That's a 1-hour loop at most. Something's not right here. Copy that. What's your assessment?" I stared down the trail where the last of the afternoon light was filtering through the canopy in pale, slanted beams. Fog was beginning to gather in the low places between the trees, and the temperature was dropping fast. "I'm going to follow his intended route, see if I can pick up any sign. Request you contact local law enforcement, let them know we might have a situation." "Will do. Maintain radio contact every 30 minutes. And Thorne?" "Yes, ma'am." "Don't be a hero. If you find anything suspicious, you call for backup before you investigate." "Understood." But as I started down the trail, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that told me I needed to prove myself. 14 months in, and the other rangers still called me college boy behind my back. They weren't wrong. I'd come to this job straight from a forestry degree at Oregon State, all textbook knowledge and enthusiasm, no real experience. Every missing person case was a chance to show I belonged here. The Hall of Mosses trail wound through some of the most beautiful temperate rainforest in North America. Massive maples draped in club moss created living curtains, and nurse logs hosted entire ecosystems of ferns and seedlings. Under normal circumstances, it was magical. Now, in the gathering dusk, those same moss curtains looked like places where someone could hide and watch. I found Ezra's first sign about a quarter-mile in, a snack bar wrapper caught on a salmonberry bush beside the trail. Cliff Bar, chocolate chip. I bagged it, marked the GPS coordinates. Standard procedure, the fog was thickening, turning the forest into a series of gray chambers connected by shadow. My flashlight beam seemed to die after only a few feet, swallowed by the moisture-heavy air. The silence was wrong, too. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no insect hum. Just the distant whisper of the Ho River and the soft drip of condensation falling from moss-heavy branches. I found the second sign where the trail forked toward the actual Hall of Mosses loop. Scuff marks in the dirt that looked like boot prints, but heading away from the designated trail and into the deep forest. This was where my training said to stop and call for backup. These weren't accidental prints. They were too deliberate, too focused. Someone had made a conscious decision to leave the marked trail. But my radio crackled with static when I tried to reach Martinez. The fog, maybe, or the dense canopy. Olympics communication could be spotty in the best conditions. I looked at my watch, 5:15 p.m., full dark in 45 minutes. If Ezra was hurt somewhere off trail, every minute mattered, and if I called for backup now, it would take them at least 2 hours to organize a search team and reach this location. 2 hours Ezra might not have. I made the decision that would haunt me for months afterward. I followed the prints. The boot prints led northwest, away from the river and deeper into old-growth forest where trees older than Columbus created a canopy so thick that daylight never fully penetrated. Within 50 yards of leaving the trail, I was in a different world, one where my flashlight beam created a moving bubble of visibility in an ocean of black. The prints were easy to follow at first. Ezra, I assumed it was Ezra, had been moving steadily but not frantically. No signs of running or stumbling. The spacing suggested a normal walking pace. Then I found the first thing that made my skin crawl. At the base of a massive cedar, maybe 8 feet in diameter, someone had built a small cairn of stones. Not random stones. These were carefully selected, similar in size and shape, stacked with deliberate precision. And carved into the bark of the cedar, about 6 feet off the ground, was a mark. 3 parallel lines, deep enough to expose the white wood beneath the bark. I'd never seen anything like it in any of my training materials. It wasn't Native American petroglyphs. Those were typically found on rock faces near water sources. This was something else. Something recent. I photographed the cairn and the tree carving, noting GPS coordinates in my incident log. My hand was shaking slightly as I wrote, though I told myself it was just the cold. The boot prints continued past the marked tree, but now they were joined by something else. A second set of prints coming from a different direction, converging with the first set and then continuing together. Someone had been waiting for Ezra. The metallic taste in my mouth got stronger. I keyed my radio again, hoping for better reception, but got only static. The fog was thick enough now that I could barely see the trees around me. My flashlight created a cone of visibility maybe 10 feet long, beyond which the world simply ended in gray nothing. I should have turned back. Every protocol I'd learned said to retreat, call for backup, wait for proper support. But the dual set of footprints continued ahead, and somewhere in that darkness, a 19-year-old kid might be dying. I kept following. The tracks led me through a landscape that seemed to shift and change around me. What had been upward-sloping ground became a subtle descent. The sound of the river faded entirely, replaced by a silence so complete that my own breathing seemed thunderous. Even the fog seemed different here, thicker, more oppressive, carrying scents that didn't belong in a temperate rainforest. Wood smoke, faint but unmistakable. I stopped, nostrils flaring, trying to pinpoint the direction. The smell was coming from ahead and slightly to the left, maybe a quarter-mile away. Someone had a fire going. Hope surged in my chest. Maybe Ezra had gotten lost, met another hiker, and they'd made camp together. It happened all the time. 2 scared hikers were safer than one. and a fire meant warmth, light, the possibility of survival. I followed the scent of smoke through the forest, moving more carefully now, trying to minimize the sound of my passage. If they were camped, I didn't want to startle them by crashing through the underbrush like a bear. The smoke smell grew stronger, and I began to see a faint orange glow filtering through the trees ahead. Voices, too. Low conversation I couldn't quite make out. Relief flooded through me. I'd found them. I approached slowly, staying downwind until I could see the fire clearly. It was a professional-looking camp. Military-style lean-to, fire ring constructed from carefully selected stones, gear organized with almost obsessive precision. A figure sat beside the fire, silhouetted against the flames. Only one figure. "Hello," I called out, stepping into the firelight with my hands visible. "Park Service. I'm looking for a missing hiker." The figure turned toward me and my relief evaporated like mist. It wasn't Ezra Caldwell. The man beside the fire was older, maybe 40, with graying beard and eyes that reflected the firelight like an animal's. He wore surplus military clothing, BDU pants, combat boots, olive drab shirt, all of it worn but well-maintained. When he smiled, I saw teeth that hadn't seen a dentist in years. "Well, well," he said, his voice carrying a faint rasp like a long-time smoker. "Look what wandered into my camp." Something about his tone made every instinct I possessed scream danger. This wasn't a friendly encounter between hikers. This felt like a predator evaluating prey. "I'm Ranger Thorne," I said, keeping my voice steady and official. "I'm investigating the disappearance of a 19-year-old hiker named Ezra Caldwell. Have you seen anyone matching that description?" The man's smile widened. "Ezra? Yeah, I've seen Ezra. Nice kid. Real polite. We had quite a conversation. Where is he now?" "Oh, he's around." The man gestured vaguely at the surrounding darkness. "Taking a little walk. He'll be back." Everything about this was wrong. The man's casual demeanor, the way he talked about Ezra like they were old friends, the military precision of his camp in an area where camping wasn't permitted, and underneath it all, the growing certainty that I was looking at someone who shouldn't be here. "Sir, I'm going to need to see some identification. Camping isn't allowed in this area of the park." His laugh was like gravel in a cement mixer. "Camping permit? Son, I don't need a permit. I live here." "That's not possible. There are no legal residences in this section of the park." "Legal?" He tasted the word like something sour. "You know what's funny about legal, Ranger Thorne? It only matters if someone's around to enforce it." The way he said my name, like he'd known it before I'd introduced myself, sent ice water through my veins. I reached slowly for my radio, hoping the proximity to his fire might improve reception. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," he said conversationally. "Radio don't work too good out here. Something about the terrain, all this iron in the soil. Plays hell with electronics." My radio produced only static. He was right. But how did he know that? How did he know exactly where the dead zones were? "Listen," I said, trying to maintain professional calm while my heart hammered against my ribs. "I just need to verify that Ezra Caldwell is safe. If you could tell me where he went or when he'll be back." "Oh, he's safe. Real safe." The man poked at his fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the fog. "Fact is, I've been keeping an eye on him, making sure he don't get hurt." "Keeping an eye on him how?" "You know, it's funny. In my day, park rangers knew their territory. Every trail, every creek, every cave. They knew the difference between someone who belonged and someone who was just visiting." There was something in his tone that made me think he wasn't just talking about Ezra anymore. "Are you a former ranger?" I asked. His eyes glittered in the firelight. "Former? Yeah, you could say that. Name's Dalton Voss. Maybe you heard of me." I had. Every ranger in the Pacific Northwest had heard of Dalton Voss. He'd been dismissed from Park Service 3 years ago after a string of complaints about his conduct, harassment of female visitors, excessive force during arrests, and finally, An incident where he'd allegedly held a teenage trespasser at gunpoint for 6 hours before backup arrived. The investigation had been quiet, but the message was clear. Dalton Voss was unstable, dangerous, and no longer welcome in any national park. And now he was sitting 20 feet away from me in the middle of nowhere, claiming to have kept an eye on a missing college student. "Mr. Voss," I said carefully, "I need you to tell me exactly where Ezra Caldwell is. Right now." "Right now?" He stood slowly, revealing a height I hadn't appreciated while he was sitting. 6'4" at least, with the kind of lean muscle that came from years of hard outdoor living. "Right now, Ranger Thorne, young Ezra is learning something important." "Learning what?" "Learning that when you wander off the marked trail, you might find something that ain't on any map." My hand moved instinctively toward my sidearm, but stopped when I saw the pistol already in Voss's hand. I hadn't even seen him draw it. Now, he said gently. "No need for that kind of excitement. We're just having a conversation. Professional to professional." "You're not a professional anymore. You were fired." His face hardened. "Fired? Yeah, for doing my job too well. For understanding that this wilderness ain't some goddamn petting zoo for city kids to come play in. For recognizing that some visitors need a different kind of education." The pieces were falling into place, and I didn't like the picture they formed. "What kind of education did you give Ezra?" "The same kind I'm gonna give you. See, the thing about being a park ranger, a real park ranger, is understanding the food chain. Most folks, they think humans are at the top. They're wrong." He gestured with his pistol toward the darkness beyond the fire. "There's always a bigger predator, always someone higher up the chain, and in my territory, that someone is me. This isn't your territory anymore. Boy, this has been my territory for 23 years. Some bureaucrats in Washington might have taken away my badge, but they didn't take away my knowledge. Every deer path, every water source, every cave and hollow and hiding spot for 50 square miles. I know them all. This forest is part of me." The fog seemed to press closer, reducing our world to just the fire and the armed man standing beside it. I could hear something now. Movement in the darkness beyond the light. Footsteps, maybe, or something larger moving through the underbrush. "Ah," Voss said, tilting his head. "Sounds like Ezra's coming back from his lesson." A figure stumbled into the firelight and my heart nearly stopped. It was Ezra Caldwell, but barely recognizable. The college student who'd signed the trail register yesterday morning was gone, replaced by something that looked like it had been living wild for weeks. His clothes were torn and filthy, his face scratched and hollow-eyed. He moved with the jerky, hyper-alert motions of prey that had learned to expect attack from any direction. When he saw me, he started to speak, but Voss made a sharp clicking sound with his tongue, and Ezra fell silent. "Say hello to the nice ranger, Ezra," Voss said. "Hello," Ezra whispered. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Ezra," I said carefully, "are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" He looked at Voss before answering. I'm fine." But he wasn't fine. Even in the uncertain firelight, I could see the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd experienced trauma beyond anything a 19-year-old should endure. His hands shook constantly, and he kept looking over his shoulder at the darkness behind him. "Mr. Voss," I said, "I need you to release Mr. Caldwell into my custody. He needs to return to his family." "Family?" Voss laughed. "Son, Ezra's learning to survive. Real survival, not the kind they teach in college outdoor programs, but the kind that matters when everything civilized falls away. Ain't that right, Ezra?" Ezra nodded frantically. "Yes, sir. Thank you for teaching me." The gratitude in his voice was wrong, all wrong. It was the kind of desperate thanks that came from someone who'd learned that compliance meant survival, and resistance meant pain. "You see," Voss continued, "most people never really understand what they're capable of until they're pushed past their limits. Ezra here, he thought he was just going to take a nice nature walk, maybe see some pretty moss, take some pictures for his Instagram. But then he met me and I showed him what the wilderness really is. What did you do to him? I educated him, taught him to track without leaving sign, showed him how to hide when something's hunting him, let him experience what it feels like to be prey. The casual way he said it, like he was describing a nature documentary, made my skin crawl. This wasn't education. This was torture. For how long? Oh, we've been at it for, what would you say, Ezra? 18 hours now? Time flies when you're learning something new. 18 hours. Ezra had been held captive for 18 hours, playing some sick game of human hunt. The fact that he was still alive suggested that Voss had been toying with him, drawing out the experience. That's enough, I said. This ends now. Mr. Caldwell, come here. You're coming with me. Ezra took a half step toward me, then stopped when Voss shifted his weight. I don't think so, Voss said. See, Ezra's not done with his education yet, and neither are you. I'm a federal law enforcement officer. If you interfere with my duties, you're a child playing dress-up. Voss cut me off. 14 months on the job? I read your personnel file before you even knew you were coming out here tonight. That stopped me cold. How did you? Boy, I know things about Park Service operations that ain't in any manual. I know that your supervisor expects check-ins every 30 minutes, and your last one was, about 45 minutes ago. I know that backup won't even start looking for you until you miss 3 consecutive check-ins, which gives us about another hour and 15 minutes. He knew too much. Way too much. I know that you came out here alone against protocol because you're trying to prove yourself. I know that you followed tracks off the designated trail, also against protocol because you thought you could handle whatever you found out here. Each word hit like a physical blow because everything he said was true. And I know, he continued, that you're about to learn the same lesson I taught Ezra, the lesson about what it really means to be a predator. The pistol never wavered in his hand. Behind him, Ezra stood frozen, eyes darting between us like he was watching a tennis match that would determine whether he lived or died. Here's how this is gonna work, Voss said. You're gonna take off that duty belt, slow and careful, and put it on the ground. Then you're gonna sit down and listen while I explain the rules of the game. What game? The hunting game. See, Ezra here has had a good head start to learn the basics. Now it's time for the advanced course, and you, Ranger Thorne, you get to be the assistant instructor. My mind raced through options. Voss was armed, experienced, and clearly unhinged. I had training, but 14 months of desk work and routine patrols wasn't much against someone who'd been living wild in these mountains for 3 years. Ezra was too traumatized to be reliable as an ally, and might even try to stop me if he thought it would earn him points with his captor. The smart play was to comply, try to de-escalate, wait for an opportunity. But every instinct told me that compliance with Dalton Voss led nowhere good. I'm not playing any games, I said. Oh, but you are. You've been playing since the moment you followed those tracks off the trail. See, I've been watching you for weeks, Ranger Thorne, learning your patterns, your routes, your habits. You take the same patrol loop every Tuesday. You always eat lunch at the same picnic table by the visitor center. You always park in the same spot. Weeks. He'd been watching me for weeks. I know you drive a 2019 Ford Explorer, license plate 237 GHD. I know you live alone in the ranger housing on Spartan Creek Road. I know you call your mother in Oregon every Sunday evening at 7 o'clock. The detailed knowledge of my personal life hit like ice water. This wasn't random. Voss had been planning this, preparing for it, studying me like a hunter studies prey. And I know, he said, stepping closer, that nobody's gonna miss you until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Your shift ends at 8 p.m., and you don't have any plans tonight. Hell, you don't have plans most nights. The truth of that, the pathetic isolation of my life outside work, would have stung under normal circumstances. Now it just meant I was going to die alone in the woods, and nobody would even know I was missing until it was far too late. So here's the game, Voss continued. It's real simple. You and Ezra are gonna run. I'm gonna count to 100, and then I'm gonna come after you. Whoever I catch first gets to watch while I work on the other one. Whoever I catch second, well, that's when the real fun starts. I'm not running anywhere. Oh, you'll run. Because if you don't, I'll just shoot you right here. And then young Ezra gets to play the game all by himself. And trust me, one-on-one against me, that boy ain't gonna last very long. I looked at Ezra, saw the terror in his eyes, the pleading expression that begged me not to abandon him to this monster. Whatever Voss had done to him over the past 18 hours had broken something fundamental in the kid's spirit. "What's it gonna be, Ranger?" Voss asked. "You gonna run and give yourselves a fighting chance, or you gonna let me put a bullet in your head right now?" The terrible thing was, I believed him. This wasn't a bluff or a negotiation. Dalton Voss was going to hunt us through these woods whether I cooperated or not. The only question was whether we'd have a head start or be executed where we stood. "If we run," I said, "what guarantee do we have that you won't just shoot us in the back?" His grin was all teeth. "No guarantees, son. That's what makes it a game. But I'll tell you this, shooting you while you run ain't near as much fun as catching you when you're tired and scared and ready to give up." I looked around the camp, trying to spot anything that might give us an advantage. His gear was military surplus but high quality. The fire was positioned to provide light without destroying his night vision. His weapons, I could see at least 2 knives in addition to the pistol, were within easy reach but secured against loss. This man had been planning for this moment for a long time. "Tick-tock, Ranger. Clock's running." I unbuckled my duty belt and set it on the ground. Voss gestured for me to step away from it, then kicked it into the darkness beyond the fire. Smart boy. Now the rules are simple. The boundary of the game is everything within 2 miles of this fire. You go beyond that, I consider it cheating, and the punishment for cheating is real unpleasant. There are no other rules. Use anything you can find. Hide anywhere you can think of. Try anything you can imagine. Just remember, I know these woods better than you know your own bedroom. He pulled out a military chronometer and set it on a log beside the fire. "I'm starting the count now. 100 seconds and then I come hunting. And boys, I haven't lost a game yet." "Ezra," I said urgently, "we need to go, now." But Ezra was frozen, staring at Voss with the paralyzed fascination of a rabbit facing a snake. "Run," Voss said gently, and something in his tone suggested that gentleness was far more dangerous than shouting would have been. "Run now, or I start shooting." I grabbed Ezra's arm and pulled him away from the fire, into the darkness of the forest. Behind us, I could hear Voss beginning to count. 1, 2, 3. We crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at our clothes and skin. Ezra stumbled constantly, his coordination shot from exhaustion and terror. I had to half carry him as we fled deeper into the fog-shrouded wilderness. 4, 5, 6. The count echoed through the trees, unnaturally loud, as if Voss was projecting his voice to make sure we could hear him no matter how far we ran. "Where do we go?" Ezra gasped. "He knows everything, every hiding place, every trail. He's been living out here for years." "We go up," I said, pulling him toward higher ground. "Get elevation, find a vantage point, try to signal for help." 7, 8, 9. But even as I said it, I knew it was futile. My radio was dead, my GPS was back with my duty belt, and the fog was so thick that any signal fire would be invisible from more than 100 yards away. 10, 11, 12. We climbed, using roots and rocks for handholds, trying to put distance between ourselves and the madman who was counting down the last seconds of our lives. The forest pressed close around us, every shadow potentially hiding an ambush, every sound potentially the approach of our hunter. 13, 14, 15. "He's done this before," Ezra panted as we scrambled up a steep slope. "The others. There were others." "What others?" He showed me pictures, Polaroids, people in the woods, people running, people... He couldn't finish the sentence. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. Dalton Voss was a serial killer who'd been using Olympic National Park as his personal hunting preserve. 16, 17, 18. How many missing hikers over the past 3 years had been attributed to bear attacks, falls, or simple misadventure. How many had actually fallen victim to a human predator with insider knowledge of park operations? 19, 20, 21. We reached a small plateau, maybe 50 feet above the fire. Through the fog, I could see the orange glow below, and the dark figure of Voss still counting methodically. He hadn't moved from his position beside the flames. Why would he? He knew these woods so well that he could track us blindfolded. 22, 23, 24. We need a plan, I whispered. Something he won't expect. There's nothing, Ezra said hopelessly. He's thought of everything. He's been planning this for months, maybe years. 25, 26, 27. But there had to be something. Some advantage we could create. Some weakness we could exploit. Voss was experienced, armed, and knew the terrain, but he was also overconfident. He'd told us the rules of his game, given us boundaries, made it clear that he intended to savor the hunt rather than end it quickly. 28, 29, 30. Overconfidence. That was his weakness. He'd dismissed us as helpless prey, counted on our panic and inexperience to make us easy targets. But I wasn't just a frightened hiker. I was a federal law enforcement officer with training in tactical operations. Training that had seemed academic during my months of routine patrol work, but which might actually mean the difference between life and death. 31, 32, 33. Ezra, I whispered. Listen to me. We're not going to run randomly through the woods like scared animals. We're going to hunt him. Are you crazy? Think about it. He expects us to run, hide, panic. He set up the whole scenario around that expectation. But what if we don't play by his rules? 34, 35, 36. He's got the advantages, weapons, knowledge, experience. But he's also alone, and he's counting on psychological intimidation to keep us helpless. What if we turn that around? 37, 38, 39. I could see the doubt in Ezra's eyes, but also something else. A flicker of hope, maybe, or just desperate willingness to try anything that wasn't running blindly through the forest. What do you want me to do? 40, 41, 42. He's going to come after us, probably following our trail from the campfire. We need to circle back, get behind him, take away some of his advantages. How? 43, 44, 45. His camp. All his gear, his supplies, his backup weapons, everything's down there by that fire, if we can get to it. But he'll be watching for that. 46, 47, 48. Not if he's following our trail in the opposite direction. Look, he's overconfident, remember? He thinks we're going to keep running uphill, get ourselves lost and exhausted. He won't expect us to double back. 49, 50, 51. It was a desperate plan, full of holes and dependent on luck, but it was better than stumbling through the fog until Voss ran us down like deer. 52, 53, 54. We started moving again, but this time with purpose instead of panic. Instead of continuing uphill, we began working our way around the slope, trying to circle back toward the fire from a different angle. 55, 56, 57. The fog was both blessing and curse. It concealed our movement, but it also made navigation nearly impossible. Without GPS or compass, I was navigating by instinct and the faint glow of Voss's fire. 58, 59, 60. We were moving more quietly now, placing each step carefully, avoiding the loose rocks and dry branches that would announce our presence. Ezra, despite his exhaustion, seemed to be recovering some of his composure now that we had a plan. 61, 62, 63. I could smell the wood smoke again, stronger now. We were getting close to the camp, approaching from the north side where the slope was gentler and the undergrowth thicker. 64, 65, 66. Through the fog, I caught glimpses of orange firelight. Voss was still there, still counting. apparently unconcerned about our movements. Why should he be concerned? In his mind, we were helpless prey running deeper into his territory. 67, 68, 69. We crept closer, using the massive trunks of old-growth trees as cover. The fire was maybe 30 yards away now, and I could see Voss clearly. He stood relaxed, almost casual, like a man timing a cooking timer rather than counting down to murder. 70, 71, 72. His gear was spread around the camp just as I'd observed earlier. Military precision, everything in its place, but also everything within reach. Knives, additional ammunition, probably a rifle somewhere I couldn't see from this angle. 73, 74, 75. I motioned for Ezra to stay put and began working my way closer to the camp. If I could get to his weapons, even the odds, maybe we could... 76, 77, 78. Something hard pressed against the back of my neck. "Don't move," a voice whispered in my ear. Not Voss's voice. Someone else. I froze, mind racing. There was someone else here. A partner, maybe. Or another victim who'd been turned into an accomplice. The cold metal against my neck felt like a gun barrel. 79, 80, 81. Very slowly, the voice whispered, "Turn around." I turned and found myself face to face with Ezra Caldwell. But this wasn't the broken, traumatized college student who'd been pleading for help minutes earlier. This Ezra was calm, focused, and holding my own service weapon, the one that had been in my duty belt when Voss kicked it into the darkness. 82, 83, 84. "Sorry about this," Ezra said, not sounding sorry at all. "But Dalton explained the rules to me real clear. Only one person gets to walk away from this game, and it's not going to be some rookie ranger who thinks he can play hero." The world tilted sideways as understanding crashed over me. There had been no 18 hours of torture, no terrorized victim learning to survive. Ezra Caldwell had been working with Dalton Voss from the beginning. 85, 86, 87. "You're not a victim," I said, the words barely a whisper. "Victim?" Ezra laughed, and the sound was nothing like the broken whimpers I'd heard by the fire. "Man, I've been waiting months for this. You think I just happened to pick this trail, this weekend, this exact campsite? Dalton's been planning your education for a long time, Ranger Thorne." 88, 89, 90. My education. Not a random crime, not even a crime of opportunity. This had all been designed specifically for me. The missing hiker report, the trail I'd followed, the camp I'd found, all of it choreographed to bring me to this moment. Why? 91, 92, 93. "Because you represent everything that's wrong with the modern Park Service," Ezra said, echoing words that sounded like they'd come from Voss. "College boys who think a degree makes them wilderness experts. Bureaucrats who care more about regulations than understanding the real predator-prey relationships that govern these mountains. 94, 95, 96. Besides," he added with a grin that belonged on something that had never been human, "it's fun. 97, 98, 99. The gun pressed harder against my neck. In the distance, I could see Voss finishing his count, stretching like a cat preparing to hunt. 100. The forest went silent except for the crackling of the fire and the hammering of my heart. Voss looked up from his chronometer, scanning the darkness with the patient confidence of a predator who knew his prey had nowhere to run. "Time's up, boys," he called into the fog. "Ready or not, here I come." But he didn't move. Not yet. He was listening, waiting for us to make the first sound that would give away our position. The silence stretched out, thick and oppressive as the fog itself. "Here's what's going to happen," Ezra whispered in my ear. "You're going to walk back to that fire nice and slow, and you're going to sit down like a good little ranger. Then Dalton and I are going to show you what a real wilderness education looks like. People will come looking for me. Sure they will. In about 6 hours, when you miss your morning check-in, and when they find your truck at the trailhead and follow your tracks to the campfire, they'll discover evidence of a struggle. Blood, torn clothing, signs that you were dragged off by something big and hungry. The plan was already in motion. They'd been preparing for this moment, creating a cover story that would satisfy investigators and close the case without ever revealing the truth. Bears, I said, understanding. Bears, Ezra confirmed. Amazing how often hikers and rangers get themselves eaten by bears in these woods. Of course, the bears don't usually leave much evidence behind. They're very thorough when they're really hungry. Move, he ordered, prodding me with the gun. I started walking toward the fire, mind racing through possibilities. Ezra was behind me with my own weapon, Voss was ahead with his pistol and knives, and I was caught between them with no cover and no options. Except, Ezra was young, maybe 21 at most, and despite his collaboration with Voss, he was still essentially an amateur. He was walking too close behind me, confident in his control of the situation, not expecting resistance from someone he saw as defeated. I stopped walking. I said, "Move." Ezra hissed. "No. I'll shoot you right here." "No, you won't. Because if you shoot me here, Dalton doesn't get his game. And something tells me Dalton doesn't like it when his games get interrupted." I was gambling everything on my read of the relationship between them. Voss was clearly the dominant partner, the one who made the rules. Ezra was the junior member desperate to prove himself, terrified of disappointing his mentor. "Besides," I continued, "you're holding that gun wrong. Safety's still on, and your finger's in the wrong position on the trigger. You're not military, not law enforcement. You're just a college kid playing with things you don't understand." "Shut up." But I could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. He knew I was right about the gun, and more importantly, he was starting to doubt whether killing me here and now was what Voss wanted. "You know what I think?" I said, turning slowly to face him. "I think you're not really part of this at all. I think you're just another victim, one that Dalton's convinced to help him hunt the next one. But when this is over, when I'm dead, what do you think happens to the only witness who can connect him to my murder?" Ezra's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't thought that far ahead. "He's been planning this for months, you said, planning my education, but he didn't plan for you to survive it, did he? You're loose end, Ezra, and Dalton Voss doesn't strike me as the kind of man who leaves loose ends." "You're lying." "Am I? When this started, did he tell you that you'd both walk away clean? Or did he promise you something vague about becoming partners, joining his operation, learning from a master?" The gun wavered in Ezra's hands. I could see the doubt spreading across his face as he started to think through the logic of the situation. "Think about it," I pressed. "How many partners do you think a serial killer keeps around? How many people has he told these same stories to?" He said I was special, that I understood the real nature of predation. I'm sure he did. And I'm sure he said the same thing to whoever came before you, and whoever came before them. From the direction of the fire, Voss's voice carried through the fog. "Boys, I'm starting to get impatient. Game time's over if you don't start playing." Ezra's head snapped toward the sound, and I saw my chance. I lunged forward, grabbing for the gun, catching his wrist and twisting. The weapon went off, the shot echoing through the forest like thunder, but the bullet went wide, splintering bark from a tree 20 feet away. We struggled for control of the weapon, rolling in the wet leaves and mud. Ezra was younger and desperate, but I had training and the advantage of being right about his inexperience with firearms. Within seconds, I had the gun. "Well, well," came Voss's voice from much closer than I'd expected. "Looks like somebody learned something after all." I spun around to find him standing at the edge of the firelight, his own weapon trained on both of us. He'd moved through the forest silently, using our struggle as cover to close the distance. "Though I gotta say," he continued, "I'm disappointed in you, Ezra. We talked about this, about staying focused, following the plan." "He was lying to me," Ezra said, scrambling to his feet. "Trying to turn me against you." "Was he lying?" Voss asked casually. "Or was he just telling you truths you weren't ready to hear?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Ezra looked back and forth between us, confusion and fear warring across his features. "I told you from the beginning," Voss continued, "that this was an education. I just didn't specify whose education it was." Understanding dawned in Ezra's eyes, followed immediately by terror. "You said we were partners." "We were, for as long as you were useful. But partners need to be able to handle stress, make good decisions under pressure. And you just failed that test pretty spectacularly." The casual way he said it, like discussing a failed exam rather than a death sentence, sent ice through my veins. This was how Dalton Voss operated. Everything was a test, a game, an opportunity to demonstrate his superiority over lesser beings. "Please," Ezra whispered. "I can do better. I can follow orders." "I'm sure you can. But the thing about hunting, Ezra, is that you can't have weak links in the pack. And you've just proven you're a weak link." The pistol in Voss's hand shifted slightly, centering on Ezra's chest. "Besides," he added with that terrible smile, "Ranger Thorn here needs to understand the stakes. Nothing teaches a man about predation like watching someone else become prey." I still had my service weapon in my hands, but Voss was positioned so that any shot I took at him would risk hitting Ezra as well. And I was beginning to suspect that was exactly what he'd intended. "This is how it works in the real wilderness," Voss said, speaking to me now while keeping his gun on Ezra. "The strong eliminate the weak, the smart eliminate the stupid, and the patient eliminate the hasty." "You're insane." "I'm educated. There's a difference. See, most people never learn the real lessons of survival because civilization protects them from the consequences of weakness. But out here, away from laws and rescue teams and safety nets, the old rules apply." His finger tightened on the trigger. "Don't," I said. "Don't what? Don't complete the lesson? Don't show you what happens when someone trusts the wrong predator? He's just a kid. He's a collaborator who helped lure you out here to die. He's bait that served its purpose. And now he's an object lesson about what happens when you fail to live up to your potential." The shot was impossibly loud in the confines of the forest. Ezra dropped without a sound, blood spreading dark across his chest. His eyes stayed open, staring at nothing, reflecting the firelight like pieces of broken glass. "And that," Voss said conversationally, "is why you should never trust anyone in a survival situation. Even your allies will turn on you, if the circumstances are right." I stared at Ezra's body, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The casual execution, the complete lack of remorse, the way Voss was already moving on as if he just swatted a mosquito. "You're a monster. I'm a teacher, and you're about to get the most important lesson of your life." He stepped over Ezra's corpse like it was a fallen log, closing the distance between us. I raised my weapon, but he was already moving, faster than someone his age should have been able to move. The impact knocked me backward, sending my gun spinning into the darkness. We hit the ground hard, Voss landing on top of me with all the advantages of position and experience. His hands found my throat before I could recover from the fall. "The thing about rookie rangers," he said, applying pressure to my windpipe, "is that they think their training makes them dangerous. But training is just theory until it meets practice." I clawed at his hands, trying to break the chokehold, but his grip was like iron. Darkness was creeping in around the edges of my vision, and my lungs were screaming for air. "And practice," he continued, "is something you only get by doing. By taking life instead of just studying it." My vision was tunneling, consciousness slipping away like water through cupped hands. In desperation, I stopped trying to break his grip and instead reached for his face, driving my thumbs toward his eyes. He jerked back instinctively, and the pressure on my throat eased just enough for me to gasp a breath. I rolled sideways, trying to escape, but he was on me again before I could get to my feet. This time he had a knife. The blade reflected firelight as it descended toward my chest. I caught his wrist with both hands, straining to keep the point away from my heart, but he was stronger and had gravity on his side. "You know what the secret is?" he asked, bearing down on the knife. "The secret to being a successful predator?" The blade was inches from my chest now, close enough that I could feel its heat. "Patience," he said. The ability to wait for exactly the right moment. And then something impossible happened. A gunshot echoed through the forest and Dalton Voss jerked sideways, crying out in pain and surprise. He rolled off me, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. I looked toward the source of the shot and saw a figure emerging from the fog. Ezra Caldwell. Somehow still alive. Somehow still moving, holding my service weapon in hands that shook with effort and blood loss. "Turns out," he gasped, "I'm a pretty good student after all." The bullet had hit him high in the chest, missing his heart by inches. He should have been dead or at least unconscious, but adrenaline and desperation had kept him moving just long enough to save my life. Voss was trying to reach his own weapon, but his injured shoulder made movement difficult. I scrambled toward him, kicking his pistol away before he could grab it. "You little," he snarled, but his words were cut off as I landed a solid punch to his jaw. "Federal agent," I gasped, my throat still burning from his chokehold. "You're under arrest." He laughed, actually laughed, even with blood running down his arm and a teenager's gun pointed at his head. "Arrest? Son, you're 30 miles from the nearest road in the middle of a national park where people disappear all the time. You think you're gonna march me out of here in handcuffs?" He was right, of course. Even if I could restrain him, even if Ezra survived his injuries, we still had to get out of these mountains alive. And Voss knew these woods better than anyone. "Besides," he continued, "you still don't understand the real situation here." "What situation?" His smile was all teeth and madness. "The situation where this isn't my first rodeo, Ranger. Where I've been perfecting this particular lesson for 3 years. Where there are a dozen other missing hikers buried in these mountains. And where the local authorities have gotten real good at accepting that sometimes people just vanish in the wilderness." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Cover-up, corruption. A network of people who knew exactly what Dalton Voss was doing and either helped him or looked the other way. "You can't arrest the darkness, son. All you can do is try to survive it." Ezra was swaying on his feet, the gun wavering in his grip. He'd lost a lot of blood and shock was setting in. We needed medical attention, evacuation, backup that might or might not come. But first, we needed to get out of these mountains alive. And Dalton Voss, even wounded and disarmed, was still smiling like he knew something we didn't. "Clock's ticking," he said. "Dawn's still 6 hours away, and this fog ain't gonna lift anytime soon. You boys better start walking if you want to make it to civilization before you bleed out." He was right again. Ezra needed a hospital, and I needed to get word to authorities who weren't part of whatever conspiracy had allowed Voss to operate unchecked. "But here's the thing," Voss continued, his voice carrying that same casual tone he'd used before executing Ezra. "I know every trail, every shortcut, every safe path out of these mountains, and you boys, well, you're gonna get lost in the dark." I helped Ezra to his feet, trying to assess his condition. The bullet wound was serious but not immediately fatal, assuming we could get him medical attention within a few hours. "We're leaving," I told Voss. "And you're coming with us." "Am I?" "You're going to guide us out of here." "And why would I do that?" I picked up his knife, tested its weight. "Because if you don't, I'm going to start cutting pieces off you until you change your mind." For the first time since I'd met him, Dalton Voss looked genuinely surprised. My. Look who's learning about predation after all. "This isn't predation, this is justice." "Is it? Or is it just survival instinct finally kicking in?" He studied my face in the firelight. "You know, I think there might be hope for you yet, Ranger Thorne. Most people never discover their inner predator." "I'm not a predator." "Aren't you? You're threatening to torture information out of a wounded man. You're prepared to use violence to get what you need. That's predatory behavior, son." The terrible thing was, he wasn't entirely wrong. The civilized part of my mind was horrified by what I'd just threatened to do. But the part that wanted to live, the part that needed to get Ezra medical attention, was perfectly willing to cut Dalton Voss into pieces if that's what it took. "The difference," I said, "is that I'll only do what I have to do to save lives. You do it because you enjoy it, for now. But wait until you've been out here a little longer. Wait until the shock wears off and the adrenaline fades and you start thinking about all the hikers who are going to die if word gets out about what really happens in these mountains. He was trying to get inside my head, make me doubt myself, turn the situation to his advantage even from a position of apparent defeat. Wait until you realize that the only way to protect future victims is to make sure certain information never reaches certain people. And the only way to guarantee that is to make sure certain people never leave these woods alive. Shut up. I'm just saying, moral certainty is a luxury you can afford in civilization. Out here, it's just another weakness that gets you killed. Ezra was leaning heavily against me, his breathing shallow and rapid. We needed to move, needed to get him help before he went into shock completely. You're going to guide us to the nearest road, I told Voss. Right now. Or what? You'll torture me? Kill me? He shook his head. Son, you don't have the stomach for what would be necessary to make me cooperate. And even if you did, even if you turned into the kind of monster you'd need to be, there's still the question of trust. What question? How do you know I won't just lead you deeper into the wilderness? How do you know I won't guide you to some nice isolated spot where my friends are waiting? Friends. Other people involved in this nightmare. The conspiracy was bigger than just one insane ex-ranger. Because, I said, if you try anything like that, I'll kill you myself. There we go, Voss said with satisfaction. Now you're starting to understand the real rules. I helped Ezra toward the edge of the firelight, trying to ignore the voice in my head that said Voss was right, that I was already changing, already becoming something different than the idealistic ranger who'd followed footprints off the designated trail. Which way? I asked. Voss considered for a moment, then pointed northeast. That way, about 8 miles to the nearest logging road. 8 miles? Could be 6 if we take some shortcuts, I know, but those paths are a little dangerous in the dark. Everything about this was wrong. Trusting him, threatening him, making deals with a serial killer in the middle of the wilderness. But Ezra was dying, and I was out of options. We started walking. The fog closed around us like a living thing, reducing our world to a few feet of wet earth and towering trees. Voss led the way despite his wounded shoulder, moving with the confidence of someone who could navigate these mountains blindfolded. You know, he said conversationally as we walked, this doesn't have to end badly for you. Meaning? Meaning there are ways to handle this situation that benefit everyone involved. Everyone except your victims. What victims? Ezra there attacked a federal officer, got shot in the struggle. I was camping illegally, got caught in the crossfire. Tragic accident, really. And the dozen other missing hikers you mentioned? What about them? People get lost in the wilderness all the time. Bears, falls, exposure. Nature's dangerous. Can't save everyone. He was offering me a way out. A story that would close the case cleanly, protect his operation, and let me walk away with my life and career intact. Course, he continued, it would require your cooperation, your silence, and your understanding that some secrets are better kept buried. I'm not going to help you cover this up. No, not even to save your own life. Not even to protect future victims from the kind of attention that would shut down park operations entirely. I didn't answer, but I was listening, and he knew it. See, the thing about exposure is that it's a double-edged sword. Sure, it might put me out of business, but it might also close down Olympic National Park for months or years while investigators go through every missing person case from the past decade. Think about how many people depend on this park for their livelihood. Think about how many families won't be able to afford food while the investigation drags on. You're saying I should let you continue killing people to protect the local economy? I'm saying you should think carefully about the broader consequences of your actions. Real leaders don't just consider immediate moral absolutes. They consider complex, long-term effects. We walked in silence for a while. The only sounds the crunch of wet leaves under our feet and Ezra's labored breathing. The fog was so thick that Voss was little more than a shadow moving ahead of us, leading us through a landscape that seemed to shift and change with every step. Besides, he said eventually, What makes you think the authorities aren't already aware of my activities? That stopped me cold. What? 3 years, Ranger. 3 years of operation in a heavily monitored national park. You think nobody noticed the pattern of missing hikers? You think nobody asked questions when search and rescue operations kept coming up empty? The implications were staggering. If local law enforcement, Park Service supervisors, or federal agencies knew what was happening and allowed it to continue. Why? I asked. Same reason governments tolerate organized crime in certain areas. Sometimes a known predator is preferable to an unknown one. Sometimes controlled evil is better than chaotic evil. That's insane. Is it? How many missing person cases have been closed with bear attack or accidental fall designations? How many families have gotten closure, insurance payouts, death certificates that let them move on with their lives? Closure based on lies. Closure based on acceptable explanations. The truth doesn't always set people free, Ranger. Sometimes it just destroys them. Ezra stumbled, nearly falling. I caught him, feeling how cold his skin had become. He was going into shock, his body shutting down from blood loss and trauma. How much further? I asked. Depends, Voss said. How much do you value your principles over this boy's life? What's that supposed to mean? Means there's a ranger station about 2 miles from here. Radio, medical supplies, direct line to emergency services. I could have you there in 30 minutes. Then let's go. But that station is staffed by people who know exactly what I am and what I do. People who've been covering for my activities for 3 years. You walk in there with me in custody and this boy bleeding out. You're not going to get the rescue you're expecting. You're lying. Am I? Tell me, Ranger Thorne. In your 14 months on the job, how many times have you been assigned to patrol sectors where missing hikers were last seen? How many times have your supervisors sent you to investigate areas where you might actually find something? I thought back through my assignments, my patrol routes, the careful way I'd been kept away from certain areas and certain investigations. The growing realization was like ice water in my veins. They know, I whispered. They know. And they've been protecting you from knowledge you weren't ready for. Knowledge that might have made you ask uncomfortable questions. But why? Why would they? Because this isn't just about me, son. This is about a system. A way of managing problems that can't be solved through conventional law enforcement. We kept walking. But my mind was reeling. If what Voss was saying was true, then my entire career, everything I thought I knew about Park Service operations, was built on lies and cover-ups. The ranger station, I said. What happens if we go there? Depends on how smart you are. If you walk in demanding arrest and investigations, you'll find yourself classified as mentally unstable due to trauma, committed for psychiatric evaluation, discredited, eventually discharged from service. And if I don't? If you're smart, you'll realize that some systems are bigger than individual conscience. You'll accept that your job is to protect the park and its visitors in whatever way proves most effective. By letting you kill people. By acknowledging that predation is part of nature, and that controlled predation is preferable to chaos. Ezra was getting heavier in my arms, his breathing more labored. Whatever moral philosophy Voss was trying to sell me, the immediate reality was that a kid was dying and I needed medical attention for him. The ranger station, I said. Take us there. Smart choice. We changed direction, following what might have been a trail or might have been an animal path through the foggy darkness. Voss moved with renewed confidence, as if my decision had confirmed something he'd believed all along. You're going to find, he said, that the world is a lot more complicated than they taught you in college. 20 minutes later, we saw lights through the fog. The ranger station was a small log building with radio antennas and a well-maintained generator. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows and I could see a Park Service vehicle parked outside. Remember, Voss said as we approached, you're walking into a situation where everyone knows more than you do. Be careful how you play it. I helped Ezra up the steps to the station door and knocked. Footsteps inside, then the door opened to reveal a ranger I recognized. Tom Hendricks, a 20-year veteran who'd been working Olympics since before I was born. Jesus Christ, he said, taking in the sight of us. What happened? Medical emergency, I said. This kid's been shot. He needs evacuation immediately. Shot? Who shot him? I looked at Voss, who was standing calmly beside me as if he belonged there. It's complicated, I said. I'll bet it is. Hendricks stepped aside to let us in. Bring him inside. Let's see what we're dealing with. The station was exactly what I'd expected. Radios, maps, medical supplies, everything needed for emergency operations. But there was something else, something that made my blood run cold. On the wall, among the standard park service communications and emergency protocols, was a map marked with red X's, dozens of them scattered throughout the park's backcountry, and next to each X dates going back 3 years. Tom, I said carefully, what are those marks? Those? Hendricks followed my gaze to the map. Those are problem areas, places where we've had incidents. What kind of incidents? The kind that require special handling. He moved to the radio, began calling for medical evacuation, but I noticed he was using codes I didn't recognize. Not standard emergency protocols, but something else. Tom, I said, I need you to listen to me carefully. The man with me is Dalton Voss. He's been killing hikers in the park. This kid was shot during an attempted escape. Hendricks paused in his radio call, looked at Voss, then back at me. Dalton, he said, you look like hell. Shoulder giving you trouble? Nothing I can't handle, Voss replied. Kid put up more of a fight than expected. They always do lately. Getting soft, maybe. I stared at them, the casual familiarity of their conversation driving home the horrible truth of what I'd stumbled into. You knew, I said. You knew what he was doing. Son, Hendricks said gently, you need to understand that there are larger forces at work here. Systems that have been in place for years, serving purposes you don't fully comprehend. Systems for covering up murder. Systems for managing problems that can't be solved any other way. He finished his radio call, then turned back to us. Medical team will be here in 15 minutes. They'll take care of the boy. And then you'll have a choice to make. You can accept that some knowledge comes with responsibilities you weren't prepared for, or you can fight a system that's bigger and more necessary than your individual moral concerns. Ezra was unconscious now, his breathing shallow but steady. Whatever else happened, it looked like he would survive. What kind of responsibilities? The responsibility to protect the greater good, even when it conflicts with abstract principles. The responsibility to understand that sometimes preventing greater harm requires accepting lesser evils. Lesser evils like serial murder. Lesser evils like controlled population management in a system that would otherwise collapse under its own contradictions. The words hit me like a physical blow. Population management. They weren't just covering up murders. They were treating human beings like wildlife, culling the herd to maintain some twisted idea of balance. How many people are involved in this? Enough, Hendricks said. Park Service, local law enforcement, federal agencies. People who understand that civilization requires maintenance, and maintenance sometimes requires unpleasant decisions. This isn't maintenance, this is genocide. This is evolution, Voss interjected. Survival of the fittest applied to human populations. The weak, the stupid, the unprepared, they get eliminated. The strong, the smart, the adaptable, they survive and reproduce. You're both insane. We're both realists, Hendricks said. And you're about to become one too, whether you like it or not. The sound of helicopters was growing louder outside. The medical team was arriving, along with whoever else Hendricks had summoned with his coded radio call. Last chance, Voss said. Accept the reality of the situation, or become another unsolved disappearance in Olympic National Park. I looked at Ezra, unconscious, but breathing. I thought about the dozen red X's on the map, each one representing someone who'd never made it home. I thought about the families who'd been fed lies about bear attacks and accidental falls, and I thought about what I was willing to become in order to survive. The helicopter was landing outside now, its rotors beating like enormous wings in the fog. Whatever choice I made in the next few minutes would determine not just my own fate, but the fate of everyone who might wander off the designated trails in Olympic National Park. "Well?" Hendricks asked. "What's it going to be?" I looked at both of them, the corrupted ranger and the serial killer who'd been operating under official protection for 3 years. Then I looked at the radio, wondering if there was anyone left I could trust. The door opened and figures in medical gear entered the station. But something about them was wrong. They moved too much like soldiers, carried equipment that looked more tactical than medical. "Time's up," Voss said with that terrible smile. "Welcome to the real world, Ranger Thorne." And as the figures surrounded me, I realized that my education in the true nature of predation was just beginning. The last thing I saw before the sedative took effect was the map on the wall, with its dozens of red X's marking places where people had learned too late that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness is the one that wears a badge. 6 months later, I'm still a park ranger at Olympic National Park. I still patrol the same routes, still write the same reports, still maintain the same professional demeanor that got me through my first 14 months on the job. But now I know what the red X's on the map really mean. Now I understand why certain areas are off limits to routine patrols. Now I comprehend the true meaning of managing problems that can't be solved any other way. Ezra Caldwell survived his injuries and was transferred to a psychiatric facility, where he remains under treatment for trauma-induced delusions. His family was told he suffered a complete psychological break during a solo hiking trip, and that his stories about serial killers and conspiracy are symptoms of his condition. Dalton Voss recovered from his shoulder wound and continues his work in the Olympic wilderness. His methods have become more refined, more careful, more selective. The red X's accumulate slowly now, one every few months, always explained away as natural causes or accidental death. And I've learned to live with the knowledge that some systems are bigger than individual conscience, that some secrets are kept for reasons beyond my understanding, that the price of speaking out is measured not just in my own life, but in the lives of everyone who depends on the stability these arrangements provide. Every morning when I put on my uniform, I tell myself that I'm protecting people, that by maintaining the system, I'm preventing worse alternatives. That controlled evil is better than chaotic destruction. But late at night, when the fog rolls in from the Pacific and wraps around the mountains like a shroud, I sometimes wonder if I've become the very thing I once swore to protect people from. And when hikers ask me about safe trails and proper precautions, I give them all the standard advice. Stay on designated trails, travel in groups, carry emergency equipment, check in regularly. What I don't tell them is that the greatest danger in Olympic National Park isn't bears or falls or exposure. What I don't tell them is that some of us who wear the uniform have learned to see visitors not as people to protect, but as problems to manage. What I don't tell them is that when someone goes missing in the deep wilderness, the search teams aren't always looking to bring them home alive. Because I've learned that speaking those truths carries a price I'm not willing to pay, and every day I don't speak them, I become a little more complicit in what happens to the next hiker who wanders off the beaten path. Some nights, I dream about that foggy October evening when I followed boot prints into the darkness and discovered that the most dangerous predator in any wilderness is the one that's learned to hide in plain sight. And some nights, I wonder if the person I was before that night would recognize the person I've become. But I keep wearing the uniform. I keep walking the trails. I keep telling myself that maintaining the system is more important than individual conscience. Because the alternative, speaking the truth and facing the consequences, would mean admitting that I've spent 6 months protecting the very monster I once swore to stop. And that's a truth I'm not ready to face. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The fog rolls in every night now, wrapping around the mountains like a living thing, and somewhere in that gray darkness, Dalton Voss is hunting again, selecting his next student, preparing his next lesson about the real nature of predation. And I pretend I don't know. Because pretending is easier than remembering what it felt like to be the kind of person who would have tried to stop him. My name is Kieran Thorne, and I am 28 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 20 months now. And this is what I've learned about the wilderness. The trees don't care about your moral principles. The fog doesn't distinguish between predator and prey. And sometimes the badge you wear to protect people becomes the very thing that makes you dangerous to them. Sleep well, hikers. Stay on the designated trails. And remember, we're here to help. My name is Kestra Dalton, and I am 28 years old. I've been a park ranger at Olympic National Park for 18 months. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Marlo Chen turned into something that still haunts me. I was still finding my footing when Marlo disappeared. 18 months sounds like enough time to know a place, but Olympic National Park spans nearly 1 million acres of temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and rugged coastline. Every day taught me something new about its hidden dangers, and I was constantly aware that my inexperience could be the difference between life and death, mine or someone else's. The call came in on October 15th at 6:47 p.m., just as the early autumn darkness was swallowing the last traces of daylight. Marlo Chen, a wildlife photographer from Seattle, had failed to return from her planned 3-day solo expedition to document Roosevelt elk during rutting season. Her rental car sat abandoned at the Sol Duke trailhead, keys still in the ignition, camera equipment worth thousands of dollars scattered across the back seat. Photographer went missing near Deer Lake, my supervisor Ray Hutchins told me over the radio, his voice crackling with static. Last contact was 2 days ago. Weather's turning. We need boots on the ground before this gets worse. I pulled my jacket tighter as I studied the topographical map spread across my truck's hood. The Sol Duke area was notorious for its maze of deer trails that split off from the main hiking route, leading deep into old-growth forest where even experienced hikers could lose their bearings. The Roosevelt elk were particularly active this time of year, and photographers often strayed from marked trails chasing the perfect shot. But something felt wrong from the start. Marlo's equipment scattered in her car wasn't just disorganized, it looked deliberately ransacked. Her telephoto lens lay twisted at an unnatural angle, and her backup camera had been smashed against the passenger door. No photographer, no matter how rushed or excited, would treat thousands of dollars of gear that carelessly. I began my search at first light, following the Sol Duke River Trail toward Deer Lake. The morning mist clung to the forest floor like smoke, muffling sounds and creating an oppressive atmosphere that made every shadow seem to move. Fall in the Pacific Northwest has a particular quality of dampness that seeps through even the best gear, and by the time I'd hiked the first mile, I could feel the cold moisture working its way through my jacket. The trail was well maintained, but as I moved deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd. Fresh boot prints, not hiking boots but heavy work boots with a distinctive tread pattern, paralleled the main trail about 20 feet into the tree line. They appeared periodically, as if someone had been moving parallel to the official route, staying just out of sight of normal hikers. I followed the prints for half a mile before they disappeared entirely at a rocky outcrop. The ground here was disturbed, with broken branches and scuffed earth suggesting some kind of struggle. But there was no blood, no torn clothing, nothing that definitively indicated violence. Just the unsettling sense that something had happened here. My radio crackled to life. "Dalton, this is base. Any sign of our missing photographer?" "Negative on direct contact," I responded, scanning the tree line. "But I've got some disturbed ground near Marker 7. Looks like there might have been some kind of altercation." "Copy that. Search and rescue team is en route to your location. ETA 40 minutes. 40 minutes felt like an eternity as I continued following faint traces deeper into the forest. The official trail curved east toward Deer Lake, but the boot prints I'd been tracking seemed to head northwest, toward an area of the park I knew was rarely visited by tourists. It was rough country, steep ravines, dense underbrush, and numerous unmarked trails that even experienced rangers avoided unless absolutely necessary. I was debating whether to wait for backup when I heard it. A faint sound that might have been a human voice, carried on the wind from somewhere ahead. It was too distant to make out words, but the tone was urgent, desperate. My training said to wait for the search team, but my gut said someone needed help now. I keyed my radio. "Base, this is Dalton. I think I'm hearing voices about half a mile northwest of the trail. Moving to investigate." Static answered me. I tried again, adjusting my position and checking my equipment. Nothing but dead air. The forest seemed to close in around me as I pushed through increasingly dense undergrowth. Ancient Douglas firs towered overhead, their branches so thick they blocked most of the remaining daylight. The sound came again. Definitely human, definitely distressed. But it seemed to be moving, leading me deeper into the wilderness. I'd been hiking for nearly an hour when I found the first piece of Marlowe's equipment, a lens cap lying in a small clearing, partially hidden under a pile of fallen leaves. It looked as if it had been deliberately placed there, too clean and undamaged to have been dropped accidentally. I photographed it with my phone and continued following the increasingly faint trail. The second find was more disturbing. Marlowe's hiking pack hung from a branch about 8 feet off the ground, suspended by climbing rope in a way that suggested deliberate placement rather than accident. Inside, I found her identification, some energy bars, and a water bottle, but her camera and most of her equipment were missing. That's when I noticed the smell. It was faint at first, almost masked by the rich scent of decomposing leaves and damp earth. But as I moved closer to a fallen log about 30 yards away, the odor became unmistakable, the sweet, cloying smell of death. Not the clean death of a deer taken by predators, but something else. Something wrong. I approached the log with my hand on my radio, though I already knew it wasn't working. The smell grew stronger with each step, and I could see flies buzzing in an agitated cloud just beyond the massive trunk. My mouth went dry and I tasted copper, the metallic tang of fear that no amount of training can completely eliminate. What I found behind the log wasn't Marlowe. It was a deer, but not killed by natural predators. Someone had butchered it with deliberate cruelty, leaving parts arranged in a pattern that seemed almost ritualistic. The antlers had been removed and placed in a rough circle around the carcass, and symbols had been carved into the bark of nearby trees. Not Native American petroglyphs or anything I recognized, but crude marks that looked fresh. I was photographing the scene when I heard footsteps, not the random crashing of an animal moving through underbrush, but the deliberate, measured pace of a human being moving carefully through the forest. Someone was out there, and they were trying to stay quiet. I froze, listening intently, my hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on my belt. The footsteps stopped. I counted to 30, then slowly began backing away from the mutilated deer. My training said to document everything, but my instincts screamed that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to conceal a threat, and the forest that had felt merely oppressive now felt actively malevolent. I was almost back to the main trail when I saw him, a figure standing motionless between 2 large trees, maybe 50 yards away. In the filtered afternoon light, I couldn't make out details, but the silhouette was unmistakably human. Male, wearing dark clothing, and completely still in a way that suggested he'd been watching me for some time. "Hello," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm a park ranger. Are you okay?" The figure didn't respond, didn't move, just stood there like a statue among the trees. I took a step forward. "Sir, I need to ask you some questions about a missing person." That's when he turned and walked away, not running or hurrying, but moving with the kind of confident stride that suggested he knew exactly where he was going. I tried to follow, but by the time I reached the spot where he'd been standing, there was no trace of him. No footprints in the soft earth, no broken branches, nothing to indicate anyone had been there at all. My radio chose that moment to crackle back to life. "Dalton, this is SAR Team Leader Morrison. What's your location? We've been trying to reach you for an hour." I looked at my watch, confused. According to my timepiece, I'd only been out of radio contact for 15 minutes. But Morrison was right. The light was wrong for early afternoon. Somehow I'd lost nearly an hour without realizing it. I'm not sure," I admitted, pulling out my GPS unit. The screen showed nothing but static. "My GPS is malfunctioning. I found some of the missing photographer's equipment, and there's a dead deer that's been mutilated. Someone's out here, Morrison. Someone who doesn't want to be found. Copy that. Can you make it back to the main trail? We'll meet you there. I tried to retrace my steps, but nothing looked familiar. The forest that had seemed merely dense before now felt like a deliberate maze, with every tree looking identical and every path leading in circles. I was beginning to understand how easy it would be to disappear completely in this wilderness, and the thought made my skin crawl. It took me 45 minutes to find the main trail, and when I finally emerged from the trees, I felt like I'd been holding my breath for hours. The search and rescue team was waiting for me. 5 experienced volunteers led by Tom Morrison, a former military man who'd been coordinating park searches for over a decade. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Morrison said as I approached the group. His choice of words made me shiver, though I couldn't say why. "Found some disturbing evidence," I reported, pulling out my phone to show him the photos. Marlowe's pack was hung from a tree like someone wanted it to be found, and there's a dead deer that's been arranged, mutilated for no apparent reason. Morrison studied the images with a frown. "These markings on the trees. I've seen something like this before." "Where?" "About 3 years ago, we had a series of incidents. Animals found dead, arranged in patterns. Hikers reporting being followed. One ranger claimed someone was living in the deep forest, setting traps and surveillance." Morrison's expression darkened. "The ranger's name was Garrett Voss. He was obsessed with the case. Started making wild accusations, saying there was a serial killer using the park as hunting grounds." "What happened to him?" "Died in a climbing accident, October 2020. But after his death, the incident stopped. Until now." We split into pairs to search the area where I'd found Marlowe's equipment. Morrison paired himself with me, leading the way back into the forest with the confidence of someone who'd walked these trails hundreds of times. But even his experience couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Tell me about this figure you saw," he said as we pushed through the underbrush. "Male, average height, dark clothing. He was just standing there. When I called out, he walked away like he had somewhere to be." "Did he seem familiar? Like someone you might have seen around the park?" I thought about it. No, but there was something about the way he moved. Confident, like he knew the forest better than I do. Morrison stopped abruptly. "Kestra, I need to tell you something about Garrett Voss. His accident. It wasn't really an accident. He was found at the bottom of a ravine with climbing gear that had been deliberately sabotaged. Someone cut his ropes. The implications hit me like a physical blow." "You think someone killed him?" "I think Garrett was getting close to something, and someone silenced him. And now, 3 years later, we're seeing the same patterns again. We found more of Marlowe's equipment scattered through the forest. A lens here, a memory card there, each item placed with deliberate care to lead us deeper into the wilderness. It was like following breadcrumbs in a fairy tale, and I was beginning to understand that we were playing someone else's game." The sun was setting when we found the cave. It was hidden behind a waterfall about 2 miles from the main trail, accessible only by climbing over slippery rocks and squeezing through a gap barely wide enough for a human body. Morrison went first, his flashlight beam dancing across wet stone walls covered in more of those crude symbols. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The cave opened into a larger chamber, and what we found there made my stomach lurch. Someone had been living here, not recently, but for an extended period. Sleeping bags, canned goods, camping equipment, all arranged with military precision, and covering every available surface, photographs. Hundreds of them. Pictures of hikers, campers, park rangers going about their daily routines, all taken with a telephoto lens from concealment. Many of the photos showed people in vulnerable moments, sleeping in their tents, bathing in remote streams, hiking alone on isolated trails. But it was the wall at the back of the cave that made my blood freeze. Detailed maps of the park were pinned to the stone, marked with red ink to show patrol routes, ranger stations, and what looked like optimal ambush points. But these weren't current maps. They were from 2020, marked with Garrett Voss's handwriting. This was Garrett's, Morrison said, his voice hollow. But look at this. He pointed to a section of the map where new markings had been added in different handwriting. Recent additions showing updated patrol schedules, new ranger assignments, and what looked like surveillance notes about individual park employees, including detailed notes about me, my daily routine, my patrol routes, my habits and preferences, all documented with obsessive care. Someone had been watching me for months, learning my patterns, preparing for... What? We need to get out of here, I said, backing toward the cave entrance. Agreed. But first, Morrison moved to a plastic storage container in the corner and opened it. Inside were more photos, but these were different. Crime scene photos. Bodies arranged in patterns similar to the mutilated deer I'd found. These aren't from Olympic National Park, Morrison said, studying the backgrounds. These are from other locations, other parks. Whoever's doing this has been at it for a long time. A sound from outside the cave made us both freeze. Footsteps on the rocky approach, moving with the same deliberate pace I'd heard earlier. Morrison killed his flashlight and we pressed ourselves against the cave wall, listening. The footsteps stopped just outside the entrance. We waited in absolute darkness for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Then, slowly, the sound of someone moving away. Morrison waited another 5 minutes before turning his light back on. "We're leaving," he said. "Now." But when we reached the cave entrance, we found our way blocked. Someone had rolled a large boulder across the opening while we were inside. We were trapped. Morrison immediately started working at the stone, trying to find leverage to move it, but it was enormous, easily hundreds of pounds. Whoever had put it there had used some kind of mechanical advantage, probably a pry bar or come-along. "The radio," I said, pulling out my handheld unit. "Maybe we can..." Static, just like before. "They're jamming us," Morrison said grimly. "This is planned. We walked right into a trap." That's when we heard the voice. It came from somewhere outside the cave, muffled by the stone but clearly audible. A man's voice, calm and conversational. "Hello, Rangers, I hope you're comfortable in there. I've been waiting a long time for this opportunity." Morrison moved to the blocked entrance. "Who are you? What do you want?" "I think you know who I am, Tom. You've been in my home looking at my work. I'm hurt you don't recognize me." The voice was wrong somehow. The tone was casual, almost friendly, but there was an artificial quality to it, like someone reading from a script or imitating another person's speech patterns. "Garrett Voss is dead," Morrison called out. "We both know that." Laughter echoed from outside the cave. "Dead? That's what you were supposed to think. That's what everyone was supposed to think. It made things so much easier. You're not Garrett," I said, finding my voice. "Garrett died 3 years ago." "Did he? Or did he just become something else? Someone else?" The voice changed subtly, taking on a different accent, a different rhythm, like an actor switching between characters. "You see, Rangers, Garrett Voss was getting too close to the truth. He was asking uncomfortable questions about missing hikers, about patterns that certain people didn't want exposed. So Garrett had to die. But his work continues." I felt Morrison tense beside me. "You killed him." "I liberated him. From rules, from restrictions, from the burden of a conscience. And now I carry on his mission. The wilderness must be protected from human contamination." Most people don't understand that. They think they can just walk into places like this, take what they want, leave their garbage and their noise and their stench. "What about Marlo Chen?" I demanded. "Where is she?" "The photographer? She's safe, for now. She's helping me with a project. You see, she's been documenting something very special, the last hours of park rangers who get too curious about things they don't understand." My blood went cold. "She's alive?" "Oh yes, very much alive, and very motivated to cooperate. Amazing what people will do when they understand their lives depend on it." Morrison was frantically examining the cave walls, looking for another way out. The chamber was larger than it had initially appeared, extending back into darkness beyond the reach of our flashlights. but every passage we explored ended in solid stone or became too narrow to navigate. "There's another way out," Morrison whispered. "There has to be. Garrett wouldn't have made this his base without an escape route." We spent precious minutes exploring every inch of the cave, but found nothing. Meanwhile, the voice outside continued its monologue, sometimes sounding like different people entirely. It was becoming clear that whoever was out there had serious psychological issues, multiple personality disorder, or at least someone who had studied Garrett Voss so intensively they could imitate his speech patterns perfectly. "You know what I learned from Garrett's research?" the voice continued. "Park rangers are predictable. You follow patterns, procedures, protocols. You think by the book instead of thinking like predators. That makes you easy to hunt. We know about your surveillance," I called out. "We found the photos, the maps. You've been watching us for months. Watching you, studying you, learning everything about you. Your routines, your fears, your weaknesses. Do you know what your weakness is, Kestra Dalton?" Hearing my name spoken by this madman made my skin crawl. "Enlighten me." "You care too much. You feel responsible for everyone who goes missing in your park. That compassion makes you reckless, willing to take risks to save people. It's admirable, really. And it's going to get you killed." Morrison had found something. A narrow crack in the back wall of the cave that might, with effort, be wide enough for a human to squeeze through. We spent another 10 minutes widening it with our knives and multi-tools, working as quietly as possible. The voice outside had gone silent, which was somehow more unsettling than the monologue. Silence meant he was planning something, or moving to a new position, or coming for us. "I'm going through first," Morrison whispered. "If I get stuck, you'll have to—" A new sound interrupted him. Scraping, grinding stone. The boulder blocking our entrance was being moved. We both froze, staring at the crack of light that appeared at the cave mouth. Someone was letting us out, but why? "Come on out, Rangers," the voice called, now sounding cheerful. "I've decided you deserve to see the finale of tonight's performance." Morrison drew his service weapon, a decision that terrified me because it meant he believed we were facing a genuine threat to our lives. I'd never seen him draw his gun in the 18 months I'd known him. "Stay behind me," he whispered. "If something happens, run for the waterfall. The current will carry you downstream, away from here." We emerged from the cave to find the forest seemingly empty. Our captor was nowhere to be seen, but in the growing darkness, that meant nothing. He could be anywhere, watching us from concealment. "This way," Morrison said, leading toward what he hoped was the direction of the main trail. But in the darkness, everything looked the same. We were lost in hostile territory, being hunted by someone who knew these woods far better than we did. We'd been walking for maybe 5 minutes when we saw the light. A bright beam cutting through the trees ahead, moving in a deliberate search pattern. For a moment I felt relief, another search team, maybe park police responding to our radio silence. But Morrison grabbed my arm, pulling me behind a large tree. "That's not rescue," he whispered. "The beam's too focused, too controlled. That's someone hunting." The light moved closer, and I could hear footsteps now. Deliberate and patient, whoever was out there wasn't in any hurry. They knew we were trapped in this section of forest, and they were taking their time. "Run," Morrison breathed in my ear. "Circle back toward the trail. I'll draw them off. I'm not leaving you." "That's an order, Ranger Dalton. Someone needs to get out of here and call for real backup." Before I could argue, Morrison stepped out from behind the tree, his weapon drawn. "Park Service, identify yourself." The light immediately swiveled toward him, and I heard the sharp crack of a rifle. Morrison dropped instantly, crying out in pain but still moving. Not dead, but definitely hit. I ran, crashing through underbrush, bouncing off trees, falling and scrambling back to my feet. I ran like my life depended on it. Because it did. Behind me I could hear pursuit. Not panicked, crashing like my own flight, but the steady, confident pace of someone who knew exactly where I was going. The main trail. If I could reach the main trail, I might encounter other hikers, other rangers. But in the darkness, I had no idea which direction it lay. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow concealed potential threats. I was stumbling through a particularly dense thicket when I saw another light ahead. This one was stationary, not moving in search patterns. As I got closer, I realized it was coming from a small clearing where someone had set up what looked like a campsite. And there, tied to a tree at the edge of the clearing, was Marlo Chen. She was alive but barely conscious. Her photographer's vest was torn and stained with what looked like blood, and her face was bruised and swollen. When she saw me approaching, her eyes went wide with terror. "No," she whispered through split lips. "It's a trap. He's..." A hand clamped over my mouth from behind, and I felt the cold metal of a knife blade against my throat. "Hello, Kestra," the voice said, and this time it was right in my ear. "I told you that compassion would be your downfall." The man holding me was strong, dressed in dark clothing that blended perfectly with the forest. I couldn't see his face, but his voice was the same one that had taunted us from outside the cave. Up close, I could hear the artificial quality more clearly. He was definitely imitating someone else's speech patterns. "Garrett Voss studied you very carefully before he died," the man continued. "He knew you'd make a perfect subject for his research. Young, inexperienced, eager to prove yourself, willing to take risks to save people. He forced me into the clearing, keeping the knife at my throat. In the lantern light, I could see more of his setup. This wasn't just a campsite, it was a torture chamber. Tables covered with tools, cameras set up to record from multiple angles, and restraints designed to hold struggling victims. "Who are you?" I managed to ask. "I'm Garrett's legacy, his work, his methods, his mission." Some people called him obsessed, but he understood something important about human nature. When you strip away civilization, strip away safety and comfort and the illusion of control, you can see what people really are. Marlo was trying to say something, her voice barely audible. I strained to listen. "Phone," she whispered. "Hidden. Camera. Still recording." She was trying to tell me she'd hidden a camera somewhere, that this was being documented. If we didn't survive, at least there might be evidence. My captor was setting up one of his cameras, adjusting the angle to capture both Marlo and myself. This is going to be Garrett's masterpiece, the psychological breakdown of two subjects under extreme stress. How long does it take before civilized people become animals? How much pain can they endure before they break completely? That's when I realized he was completely insane. Not just violent or criminal, but genuinely disconnected from reality. In his mind, he wasn't murdering people. He was conducting research, continuing the work of a dead man who had become his obsession. Garrett Voss wasn't a researcher, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He was a park ranger who went crazy and got himself killed. The knife pressed harder against my throat. Don't you dare diminish his work. Garrett understood that the wilderness brings out people's true nature. Strip away their technology, their safety nets, their comfortable assumptions, and you see what they really are underneath. He moved to a table covered with tools, selecting what looked like a hunting knife with practiced ease. "We're going to start with the photographer. She's been very uncooperative so far, but I think seeing her rescuer tortured might motivate her to participate more enthusiastically." That's when I heard it, the distant sound of engines approaching. Vehicles, multiple vehicles, moving fast along the access road. Real rescue teams, finally responding to our extended radio silence. My captor heard it too. His head snapped up, and for the first time he looked genuinely worried. "They're too early," he muttered. This wasn't supposed to happen for hours. I realized that Morrison must have activated some kind of emergency beacon before he was shot. Whatever backup plan he'd put in place was finally paying off. "You need to run," I told the madman. "You've got maybe 10 minutes before this place is swarming with law enforcement." He looked at me with genuine surprise, as if he couldn't understand why I would warn him. "You're trying to save me, even after everything I've done?" "I'm trying to end this before anyone else gets hurt." For a moment, something almost human flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "No," he said, raising the knife. "If I can't complete Garrett's research, then at least I can add 2 more specimens to his collection." But the sound of approaching vehicles was getting louder, and I could see lights moving through the trees. He was running out of time, and he knew it. That's when Marlo Chen did something incredibly brave. Despite being tied to a tree and beaten half to death, she started screaming at the top of her lungs. Not words, just pure sound, loud enough to guide the rescue teams directly to our location. My captor spun toward her, raising the knife, and I did the only thing I could think of. I threw myself at him, not trying to fight but just trying to disrupt his attack long enough for help to arrive. We went down together, rolling across the forest floor. He was stronger than me, better trained, but I had desperation on my side. I fought like an animal, clawing and biting and kicking, trying to stay alive just a few more seconds. The knife raked across my arm, sending fire through my nervous system. But I managed to grab a handful of dirt and throw it in his eyes. He cursed and swung blindly, the blade missing my head by inches. Then suddenly there were lights everywhere, voices shouting, the sound of people crashing through the underbrush toward us. Real rescue teams, real law enforcement, finally arriving to end this nightmare. My captor looked around wildly, realizing he was surrounded. For a moment I thought he might surrender. But then his expression changed to something utterly cold and determined. "Garrett's work will continue," he said, and before anyone could stop him, he turned the knife on himself. He died there in the forest clearing, taking his secrets with him. We never learned his real name, never discovered how he'd connected with Garrett Voss, or why he'd chosen to continue the dead ranger's twisted research. The investigation found evidence of at least 6 murders across 3 states, all following similar patterns, but many questions remained unanswered. Marlo Chen survived, though she spent 3 weeks in the hospital recovering from her injuries. Her hidden camera had indeed recorded everything, providing evidence that helped connect the killer to other unsolved cases. She never returned to wilderness photography after that night. Tom Morrison recovered from his gunshot wound, though he retired from search and rescue work 6 months later. He said the forest didn't feel the same anymore, that knowing what could be hiding out there had changed his relationship with the wilderness permanently. As for me, I transferred to a different park in Colorado 3 months after the incident. I told myself it was for career advancement, but the truth was that I couldn't walk the trails of Olympic National Park without feeling watched. Every shadow might conceal a threat. Every sound might be someone moving carefully through the trees. But I learned something important that night about the nature of evil. The most dangerous predator in any wilderness isn't the bear or the cougar or the steep cliff face. It's the human being who has chosen to abandon their humanity, who sees other people not as fellow travelers but as prey. The wilderness doesn't create monsters. It just gives them a place to hide. I still work as a park ranger, and I still love the wild places of this country, but I'm more careful now, more aware of the signs that something isn't right. I trust my instincts when they tell me I'm being watched, and I never ever go into the deep forest alone. Because somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between the trees, there might be someone else carrying on Garrett Voss's work. Someone who sees my uniform and my compassion as weaknesses to be exploited. Someone who is patient enough to wait for the perfect opportunity to add another specimen to their collection. And the most terrifying part? They might be someone I work with every day, someone I trust, someone who knows my routines and my weaknesses better than I know them myself. The forest keeps its secrets, but some secrets are too dangerous to stay buried forever.